After nearly 28 years on the bench, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer is going to be stepping down from his post at the end of the court's current term. So what do we know of his replacement? Well, we know their race and gender, which are apparently the most important qualifications for Democrats and the Biden regime when appointing someone to the highest court in America. Is it okay to make it explicitly a role for a black woman only? We will answer that question in tonight's Hold the Line.
What we should be doing, we talked about the Supreme Court. I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court to make sure we, in fact, get every representation. Not a joke. Not a joke. I pushed very hard for that.
Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. That was Joe Biden. Not a joke. Back in February of 2020, promising to nominate the first black woman to the United States Supreme Court. So now we're there. We have the Breyer seat opening up, and people are asking, okay, so who's it going to be? Now, first off, is Biden going to keep the promise that he made on the campaign trail? And let's remember for a moment here, Joe Biden needed the African-American vote when he was trying to win the Democrat primary. In fact, the turning point for him, many would point to, was in South Carolina, where a majority of Democrat primary voters are African-American, and they came out in strong support of Joe Biden at that time, and that perhaps, most likely, changed the trajectory of the race so that Joe Biden actually ended up becoming the Democrat nominee. Part of that was the promise that he made about appointing a black woman to the Supreme Court. Well, Biden, as of today, is saying he's going to keep his commitment to nominating a black woman to the court. Watch.
I will select a nominee worthy of Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence and decency. While I've been studying candidates' backgrounds and writings, I've made no decision except one. The person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court. It's long overdue in my view. I made that commitment during the campaign for president, and I will keep that commitment.
Now, there's a problem here. Why is the Biden regime, why is Joe Biden himself, saying that they're only going to look at black female candidates for this role? Now, he certainly could have, and many would argue perhaps based on some of the qualified nominees, should have appointed a black female jurist to the highest court in the land. But let's just take a moment to recognize that's a different thing from saying he will only consider black female jurists for that role. Is that ethical? It certainly wouldn't be legal in a whole lot of other contexts. You can't say, I will only hire a black female to be my CEO if you're running a board, let's say. Or you can't say, I will only rent my home to an Asian American female. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. And in fact, even in the affirmative action regime of America today and for decades now, you can't have explicit racial quotas when talking about college admissions. You can only have a holistic approach. So they try to make it less clear, less explicit that race is playing such a major role, and I think it's widely seen by at least everyone on the right as quite dishonest in how the admissions process works. But why is it okay for Joe Biden to say this, to do this? Doesn't it automatically at some level bring about questions about the qualifications of this nominee? Now that he said it will be a black female nominee, well, was this the best person for this role? Or was this the best person that fits into the categories that he establishes of the gender and race characteristics that he has chosen? This is something that we should really think long and hard about. As a society, we've been working for a very long time and having to overcome some tremendous obstacles and tremendous evil in our past when it comes to racial discrimination. And it's rooted in a principle that all human beings are equal. We are all the same and should be treated the same in the eyes of the law. But that's not the same thing as getting rid of meritocracy or creating what the Supreme Court has referred to in the past as a racial entitlement system. Some people getting some benefits because of their skin color, because that inherently means other people are suffering as a result of this, the disparity created, the unequal treatment as a result of their race. Because if someone gets a benefit, someone else doesn't, that's also discrimination. So what does the Biden regime have to say about this? Well, he just talked a lot about how Breyer believes that it's about getting it right. Watch.
Everyone knows that Stephen Breyer has been an exemplary justice. Fair to the parties before him, courteous to his colleagues, careful in his reasoning. He's written landmark opinions on topics ranging from reproductive rights to health care, to voting rights, to patent law, to laws protecting our environment, and the laws that protect our religious practices. His opinions are practical, sensible, and nuanced. It reflects his belief that the job of a judge is not to lay down a rule, but to get it right.
And that is what they would want. That is what they've expected from Breyer up to this point in time. And he has been very loyal to the living Constitution activist judicial philosophy that the left demands from people like Sonia Sotomayor, who always delivers for the left, and Justice Elena Kagan, who delivers, but not with the same 100% precision of the activist that Sonia Sotomayor does. But Breyer is a reliable leftist on the court, so they want a reliable leftist to replace him. That is for sure. But it also gives you a sense of the Democrat Party's view, which still persists to this day as we're having this discussion, that somehow your skin color should be indicative of your politics, of your view of the world. The View, which is a very stupid show that unfortunately has far too many viewers in America today, said that, for one of the hosts, I should say, Sonny Hostin, says that Clarence Thomas is not representative of the black community. Watch this.
Considering the uneven kind of court we have right now, it's so important that this is happening in a time where we can get another liberal. And of course, the representation more than anything, you pointed it out, first black woman, there's only been 2 black men. And that those numbers are a little shocking.
And one doesn't really represent the black community.
Doesn't represent the black community. Based on what? Based on what? Think about what she's saying there. And then you have The View's Joy Behar saying that Amy Coney Barrett and Thomas were only put there because they were a counter to what the more authentic female voice was on this one. Watch this.
You know, you could make the case that somebody like Amy Coney Barrett was put in there because she's a white woman who they say, well, she'll go against abortion rights, and she's a woman. So that was deliberate, I think. Clarence Thomas, a black guy, a black man, a justice, okay, I'll give it to him. He's a smart guy. But he is to the right of Attila the Hun, this guy, and they put him in there thinking, oh, a black man will go against voting rights, which is what he does.
Unbelievable. I mean, Joy Behar really is one of the dumbest people on television. Okay, the search for outgoing Supreme Court Justice Breyer's replacement has already begun. We'll take a closer look at some of Biden's potential nominees with the Vice President of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for Constitutional Government, John Malcolm, when we come back. First, I want to talk to you about protecting your online data. A lot of companies promise your privacy is guaranteed, but we know that's not true. That's why you need a new privacy and cybersecurity application tool called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure uses proprietary encryption and is offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communication is based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech platforms. Privacy is a big issue now. You need Secure to help you, all right? It only costs $5 for the Messenger, $10 for the Messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com, take back your privacy today. That's SEKUR.com. Use promo code BUCK for 25% off. We'll be right back with more. Hold the line. After more than 27 years on the Supreme Court, Justice Stephen Breyer officially announced his retirement earlier today. The move setting President Biden up for his first opportunity to fill a vacant seat on the high court as he affirmed his pledge to nominate the first black woman. So who are the potential contenders? Let's get into all this with the Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation, John Malcolm. John, thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
Before we get into the list of contenders, John, let's just talk for a second about how Justice Breyer was apparently surprised that someone leaked the news on his retirement. Sources say he wasn't forced out of his seat despite mounting pressure from progressives who want a younger replacement on the bench. But what are your thoughts on all this?
Well, look, there was a tremendous amount of pressure on Justice Breyer to retire at the end of the last term. There was one leftist group that had a truck driving in front of the Supreme Court saying, Breyer, retire now. He's certainly going out on his own terms. I can imagine that he was upset. Justice Breyer is a very proper gentleman with a lot of dignity, and I'm sure would have much preferred standing at a podium next to Joe Biden rather than having some White House staffer leaking the fact that he was going to be announcing his retirement.
Now, let's take a look at the potential replacements for the seat currently occupied by Justice Breyer. Biden's potential nominees. The top of the short list is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who Biden nominated to replace now Attorney General Merrick Garland on the D.C. Court of Appeals. Also, Leandra Kruger, who sits on the California Supreme Court, and Michelle Childs, the top pick of James Clyburn. Not on the short list, at least not the kind of ones, the one that we got here and being talked about is Kamala Harris. Do you think there's a clear standout? Do we have some idea of, before we talk about the possible politics of a nominee, are there one or two who you think are probably going to get the nod from the Biden White House?
Well, it all depends. So you had on that montage, Sri Srinivasan and Paul Wofford. They will not be the nominees because the president has said that he's going to name an African-American woman, and I think he's going to stick to that. The reason why I say it all depends is because the Democrats have control of the Senate. They have all 50 Democrats, and if there were a tie, Vice President Kamala Harris is there to break a tie. There hasn't been a single Democratic senator who has voted against a single judicial nomination that has been made by President Biden. So he could go with a far more controversial pick, and they may very well still be able to get that person through. So if you're looking to have a relatively easy, I think, confirmation fight, not that any of these confirmation fights are easy, the top two names would be Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson of the D.C. Circuit. She's been a judge for a long time. She was a former clerk to Justice Breyer. She's been through the federal judicial confirmation process twice, most recently last June, when, as you mentioned, she was elevated to replace Merrick Garland on the D.C. Circuit. At that time, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Lindsey Graham voted to confirm her. President Biden has said that when you go into the Supreme Court, all bets are off. I would note that he voted, for instance, to confirm Clarence Thomas to the D.C. Circuit and then voted against him for the Supreme Court. The other person who would, I think, have an easier time would be Justice Leandra Kruger of the California Supreme Court. She was a John Paul Stevens clerk. She worked in the Solicitor General's office and has argued 12 cases before the Supreme Court. She worked in the Office of Legal Counsel. She's known to have a very pleasant person and a relative moderate on a very liberal court, the California Supreme Court. But I think he'd have an easier time with those two. If he decides to go with, say, a Sherilyn Ifill, who's president and general counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or perhaps with, Stacey Abrams' sister, who is a federal district court judge in Macon, Georgia, the Middle District of Georgia, it'll be a rougher slog. But with the slim majority, if the Democrats all stick together, he will get his pick confirmed.
Is there anyone who is in serious contention who would be considered the, let's say, the most likely to be an activist leftist on the court, or would you assume the politics of the various jurists here are all pretty close?
Well, I'm going to have to look into the records of all of these shortlists.
Sorry, I know I'm asking a lot, but so far you've got everybody. You've got a lot on everybody.
Well, so certain Sherilyn Ifill, as she's been quite vocal and on a number of causes. She is hard left in terms of her politics. I've actually met her. She's a very nice person, but there's no question about what her political instincts are. There's the current Attorney General in New York, Letitia James, who's actively investigating the Trump companies and the former president. She's, through those investigations and other investigations, would draw a lot of attention and criticism. In terms of the judges, Ketanji Brown Jackson has been judge for a long time. She's written a little bit of harsh language against the former president. Some of the cases that came before her having to do with subpoenas by the House and whatnot. But neither Ketanji Brown Jackson nor Leandra Kruger are bomb throwers.
Gotcha. So there's no one who's the clear, shall I say, the clear choice of the radical left among the ones, they're all Democrats will probably approve of. And okay, fair enough. But I did want to ask you about this one.
Radical left would probably like a Cheryl and Eiffel.
Okay, Cheryl and Eiffel,
the president wants
fair
to
enough.
take that on.
Yeah, fair enough. But there is this conversation that still happens, getting attention, at least the media. I want you to address it. Jen Psaki had to address the White House press secretary responding to the possibility of Kamala Harris, the current vice president, as a Supreme Court pick. Watch this.
Would someone who was an attorney general of a large state and who served with many key Senate votes be an attractive candidate to the president for an open Supreme Court seat?
I see what you did there, Peter. But the president has every intention, as he said before, of running for re-election, and for running for re-election with Vice President Harris on the ticket as his partner.
Not enough.
Would you have another question?
Yeah.
So can I just ask, is that possibility being taken? Look, I know I'm asking at some level what the future holds, and I'm a big believer in no one can predict the future, right? But is that possibility of Kamala as a Supreme Court pick for the Biden administration because of her low popularity, and can she take over for him? You know all the politics around it. Is that taken seriously in legal circles? And then beyond that, is it possible that then she could be the tie-breaking vote to make herself a Supreme Court justice? Because that seems at least theoretically possible.
I suppose it's theoretically possible. I haven't looked into the Senate rules or constitutional history about somebody voting for themselves to break a tie. I think it's highly unlikely to happen. The president has said he's going to run for re-election with her on the ticket. Apparently, she said that she's not interested in the job. It also seems kind of strange if you're thinking about politics with a small p. If the president were thinking, okay, I want to dump her from the ticket and give her a fallback job. A life tenured position on the highest court in the land, that's a heck of a fallback job. A job as vice president is only for a few years. She could serve on the Supreme Court if she were confirmed for 30 years or more. So that would be a rather radical thing to do. So I don't think it's going to happen. But hey, strange things happen all the time inside the Beltway. So never say never.
Really quickly before we let you go, I just want to know, do you expect this is going to be a bruising political fight, or is this going to kind of be just business as usual to get this through?
Yeah, if it's a Cheryl and Eiffel, I think it's going to be a bruising political fight or somebody like that. If it's a Ketanji Brown Jackson or a Leandra Kruger, it'd be tough to defeat those either of them.
I think you might get a few
I think the Republicans could point out. Yeah, the Republicans could point out things like they have a different judicial philosophy. This is not the kind of nominee that we would come up with if we were in charge of the White House. And here's why. They can make those political points to speak beyond the Senate Judiciary Chamber, but defeating the nominee would be tough.
Yeah, I think some of the qualified nominees you mentioned, at least qualified from a resume perspective, I think they'll get a couple of Republican votes, but we'll have to see how this goes down. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us and all the expertise. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
For 2 years now, students have been masking up in schools around the country, and health officials seem to have little regard for the negative consequences it may be having on young minds. Coming up, we'll talk to clinical psychologist Dr. Chloe Carmichael about the profound, widespread masking and how that may be having a serious effect, a negative effect on America's children. Let's talk about the stock market for a minute. The market's very volatile right now. One of the very few people who predicted the 2020 crash is warning that something really big is coming in 2022. His name is Mark Chaikin, and his newest prediction has gone viral with 1.5 million views. I've met Mark. He's a 50-year veteran of Wall Street. He's a very smart guy. I'm encouraging you to pay attention to this message. According to Chaikin, a historic event in 2022 will cause a massive shift in the wealth divide, and it's going to affect anyone who owns stocks. He's predicting that a new form of technology is going to disrupt everything and change the way thousands of companies will need to do business in 2022. It will affect everyone from Apple to Amazon, he says. Watch his full, brand new warning free of charge by going online to 2022stockmarketmessage.com. That website again is 2022stockmarketmessage.com, all one word, 2022stockmarketmessage.com. Some classrooms may be open around the country, most, in fact, 95% according to Joe Biden, but many American school children are being forced to follow unnecessary and often draconian precautions that actively harm their ability to learn. However, some brave medical experts, like my next guest, are sounding the alarm on why mask mandates hurt children in classrooms and disrupt their ability to communicate, read, and develop. My guest is clinical psychologist and author of Nervous Energy, Harness the power of your anxiety. Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Dr. Carmichael, thanks for being with us.
Buck, thank you for having me, and thank you so much for being bold enough to talk about this issue.
So it seems to me that with no medical training, you're a doctor, I'm not, but just watching what's happening across the country, we know that learning loss for children for remote learning is massive. We're also now, all the data suggests that, and very few people can really make a counter argument against that. We also are seeing more and more that masks have real learning and even psychological harms in the classroom. Can you just tell us about how that works and what you're seeing?
Sure. Well, as a clinical psychologist, of course, I'm very interested in the brain and in communication. And obviously, I don't even think it takes the clinical psychologist to tell us that covering up your entire face, as well as the faces of everybody else around you, is going to be disruptive. And I'm especially concerned for children because what we have in our brains, Buck, are these things called mirror neurons. And just like the name implies, mirror neurons will mirror whatever facial expression they see. So even if I'm feeling very happy, but I see somebody else make a sad face, I don't become sad, but I physically register the presence of that sadness. It's the brain underpinnings of empathy. Now, adults can kind of fill in the blanks and the gaps a little bit, but children who are still learning these concepts, they're learning to read and send social signals. I'm really concerned about what that's going to be doing for these children. I mean, I could go on and on about it, Buck. I have so many concerns about this.
So you write in your article on this, if children don't have the normal opportunities to learn how to navigate social situations, if adults don't respond to their facial expressions, and if children are deprived of normal face-to-face social interactions, then how could we be surprised that they experience an increase in feelings of isolation and disconnection? Can you expand on this?
Absolutely, Buck. So what I'm also concerned about, what you're highlighting there, is I'm concerned about children's self-esteem. So in a normal situation, when a child, say, makes a sad face and the teacher notices and comes over and says, "Hey, Junior, what's going on? How can I help you?" What's also happening there is the child is getting a signal that his experience is noticed and that his experience matters and that he matters. When the teacher is unable, literally, to even see what's going on with the child, I'm very concerned that that could hurt the child's self-esteem. There's also something called the facial feedback hypothesis, which is where not only do we make facial expressions based on how we feel, but we actually have our feelings informed sometimes based on our body. That's why we'll get a gut level reaction, or, our face will make an expression before we even fully realize why we're making it. Now, what I'm concerned about with masks is that if it becomes less socially rewarding to make facial expressions because nobody sees them or responds to them, and then children reduce making them, then this issue, which the Surgeon General recently corroborated with a report about children's anxiety and depression going through the roof, could be exacerbated because they could have what psychologists call emotional flattening if their primary, source, especially for children who may not always have words, if we're covering up their faces as well as the faces of people around them, how could we expect that this would not have an effect on their development?
So we can go to concerts these days as adults, right? Dinner, Broadway shows here in New York City. And there are a lot of circumstances indoors where you have people, adults, who are entirely unmasked. Dinner, obviously, is one of them. But for teachers, it seems, being in the same room as the population, children who are at the lowest risk overall by age stratification for a poor COVID outcome, somehow that's too dangerous, and so that's forbidden, so the kids have to mask up. I mean, how are they making these risk calculations? It doesn't seem to add up.
That's a really good question, Buck, because when we look at places like Sweden or the United Kingdom, it's not as if there's some kind of an issue there of all of the teachers having a higher rate of infection. The teachers in those areas tend to show the same rate of problems, of COVID-related problems, as the rest of the population. So I think that you're asking a really good question. I personally actually moved to Florida from New York. I know exactly what you mean about New York. And personally, personally, I can handle, masking up. I don't like it, but it's not going to throw, my development off. But I'm a mother to a 5-year-old, and he was only 3 years old when all of this began. And I said, absolutely not. He is not going to start school, and they're still doing it. To think he's 5 now, and he was 3 when this began. I was very concerned about what that could do. And I'm so thankful that you're talking about it. Barry Weiss is talking about it. Megyn Kelly is talking about it. It just seems almost like it's something that we've been told we can't talk about and we can't ask questions about, or else we get, smeared as anti-intellectual, which is the most bitter irony, because as you said, when we really look at the data, it's a perfectly valid question to be asking.
So when parents reach out to you to ask you as a medical expert about what their child faces, if they have concerns, let's say, about masking, what some of the downsides, some of the risks are from this, first of all, what are they saying to you and what are they asking you? And what are you telling those parents in response about what masking is meaning for kids now going on 2 years of this?
Yes. So just to be absolutely clear, I'm a clinical psychologist. So I have a PhD in clinical psychology. And, honestly, parents come to me almost in secret. They've been shamed into not wanting to ask these questions. For example, when I even just shared my article about this, which is at maskharms.com, where I go into all of these details, I shared that blog with some psychologist colleagues. And do you know what they said to me? They said, Chloe, there's nothing wrong with the science, that you're saying in this article, but we don't think that you should share it because you could be triggering insurrectionists and parents that would take a gun to a school board meeting. And I said, are you kidding me? There's of course nothing in my blog that, encourages violence. Absolutely not, obviously. And I said, in fact, I think it's when we don't give people a place that they can ask questions and use words and have discussions and debates, I frankly think that's when we are more vulnerable to parents acting out in anger. So to answer your question, Buck, when parents come to me, they're honestly more sheepish and feel like they need permission to even be asking these questions because they've been blackballed and smeared as somehow bad parents for wanting their children to be unmasked. I mean, if that's not the greatest irony in the world.
Dr. Carmichael, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Buck.
We'll be right back with more Hold the Line, but first let's talk about protecting your most valuable asset. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason. Without it, a fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime your homeowner's policy doesn't cover. It's called home title fraud. The FBI says home title fraud is one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially, which is why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on documents stating you sold your home to him. Then he takes out loans against your home and leaves you with the payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title. The instant they detect anyone from a cyber thief to a renter to a relative trying to forge their way onto your home's title, they help shut it down. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim. Enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. Earlier this week, rock icon Neil Young threatened to remove all his music from Spotify, accusing the platform of providing podcaster Joe Rogan an outlet to spread COVID-19 vaccine misinformation. Spotify quickly chose Rogan over Young and pulled Young's music, but he's not the only critic of Rogan's presence on Spotify. Controversy comes after 270 medical professionals signed a petition asking the platform to crack down on Rogan's podcast and enforce a clear policy for misinformation. Joining me now, host of Counterculture on the Epic Times, Danielle D'Souza Gill. Hey, Danielle.
Hey, Buck. Thanks for having me.
I hadn't heard of Neil Young in, I don't know, maybe ever, actually. I can't think of any of his songs off the top of my head. So what exactly happened here for everyone watching at home? What's the controversy?
Basically, he thought he was a big shot. He thought it was about 50 years ago. And he thought that, hey, if I give them an ultimatum, Spotify's going to choose me. But of course, they didn't. They chose Joe Rogan. And big shock, other people who are also quite boring on the radio, like Howard Stern, sided with Neil Young. But really to no avail because Joe Rogan is way more popular.
Yeah, Neil Young's response to being pulled from Spotify, by the way, was this: I did this because I had no choice in my heart. It is who I am. I am not censoring anyone. I encourage you to do all you can to stop Spotify from spreading dangerous, life-threatening misinformation about COVID. Do not let Spotify contaminate those young minds, young music-loving spirits, rather, with misinformation that could cause death. Do you think anyone in the country actually gets any of their information about anything from Neil Young? I think this is fascinating.
I really don't think so. And what's so funny is that he really just canceled himself. You know, a lot of us on the conservative side, we get canceled, but he actually chose to be canceled. He gave them an ultimatum. He said, hey guys, here's your chance to cancel me. So I think, you know what, that's the decision he made. He feels good about it in his heart. So I'm happy to see him off of Spotify.
You mentioned Howard Stern. He's also weighed in on this one. I think this is fascinating. All these people who essentially will say, I'm not for censorship. I just want to censor this person this time or on this issue. Here's a guy who used to be a big self-professed advocate of free speech and the First Amendment. Watch Howard Stern.
Then you know, he's not. I don't think he's for censorship. I don't think Neil Young is for censorship. I just think he's saying, look, I don't want to be part of this organization. Because if my music is helping people bring people to the table, and then they're spreading something as lethal as don't take the vaccine, do this.
That makes sense.
I'm against any kind of censorship, really. You know, I really am. I don't like censorship. But when you're talking about life and death, like poor Meatloaf got sucked into some weird cult.
So he's not for censorship, except he is for censorship.
Yes, Buck, I have to say, I'm sure that your radio show is much better than his. I cannot believe that people even listen to him these days. Honestly, I think maybe back in the day he was somewhat, interesting. Maybe he was a little bit of a free thinker or something. But at this point, he really isn't. He really is just a hardcore leftist, and he doesn't really have any thoughts on this. His expertise is supposed to be celebrities and diving into, their deepest, darkest secrets. He really doesn't know anything, let alone being a medical professional or being one to censor other people on platforms.
It's not only people in the arts, music, and media who want censorship. And I guess this is a lot more concerning to folks who are at least paying attention and seeing what the Biden regime is putting out there. Vivek Murthy, who is the Surgeon General, he referred to the misinformation out there and how social media, now this comes right as the Joe Rogan controversy is happening. He doesn't name Joe Rogan, but feels like this was probably directed in Joe Rogan's direction. Here's the sitting U.S. Surgeon General for the United States federal government, Vivek Murthy, talking about how he wants censorship.
What do you think are the best ways to push back on misinformation about COVID that continues to be aggressively pushed, whether it be Joe Rogan's podcast or all over Facebook?
These platforms have still not stepped up to do the right thing and do enough, I should say, to reduce the spread of misinformation. The only way we get past misinformation is if we are careful about what we say and we use the power that we have to limit the spread of that misinformation.
Yeah, so this is the government calling for the shutdown of voices of dissent about public policy issues, by the way. And also it's remarkable. So that's a chilling situation, I think, Danielle. But beyond that, I wanted your reaction to this idea that the misinformation is all coming from opponents of the regime. They have been enormously and catastrophically wrong on a whole range of issues, from things like, the vaccines will stop the spread of the virus. False.
Absolutely. And I think what's crazy is even people who say, these are private companies, Twitter's a private company, Facebook's a private company. Well, this is not a situation where we're talking about the private sector. We're talking about literally the government, the Surgeon General, putting pressure on these private companies. So we have the government getting involved in forcing this censorship upon us. And as you said, the people that he wants censored, these people oftentimes that Joe Rogan was interviewing are professional virologists, they're epidemiologists, they're people who are far more qualified than Vivek Murthy. They actually have far more eminent degrees. They are much more well established in their field. So the fact that he doesn't want us to even hear from them, I think shows just the level that the government is willing to go to here. And of course, we see, as you said, they have literally been wrong on almost everything. And so they actually are the ones who have been spreading the misinformation. And of course, mainly that is Fauci.
Now they're also trying to say that if we just change the words then it's not censorship or cancel culture. I know, Danielle, neither you nor I nor anyone watching this goes to The View to learn anything, because I do think it is one of the dumbest roundtable conversations you could find anywhere. I would recommend people go down and ask strangers at the nearest bus depot for their thoughts on politics before actually taking any advice or thoughts from the overpaid hosts of The View. But here they are trying to spin this and engage in the usual Democrat propaganda. Watch this one.
It's not a cancel culture, it's a consequence culture. And the way we handle is we don't buy Spotify. We ignore Spotify.
Yeah, but don't you want good corporate citizens, Joy? I mean, you have, people always came down on Facebook and they came down on Twitter and they said they're disseminating all this dangerous information. Don't they have some accountability for it? It is their platform, it is their business, and I want a good corporate citizen. I want a citizen that has a policy. I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify. He's got 11 million listeners. He's got a $100 million, contract as of 2020. But I do think as the podcast platform, you have to have some sort of guidelines. How about a disclaimer?
What do you make of that?
Well, Sunny Hostin literally just said, quote, "I want a citizen who wants a policy." What does that even mean? A citizen who wants a policy? I mean, who knows what they're even saying? Honestly, at this point, I think that they're really just comedy. I don't even know how people can take them seriously. And even when it comes to these issues, I mean, they really just compete with who's more left than the other. One of them says, oh, yeah, we need to censor them even harder on places like Facebook. And the other one says, oh, no, that's not enough. So, of course, the left, I mean, they think that they actually are the ones who decide what information we can even take into our brains at this point.
Astonishing stuff. Danielle, thanks for making sense of it for us.
Thank you.
Next up on the cancel culture chopping block, professional attire. Yeah, apparently looking professional in the work environment is now, quote, get ready for this, white capitalism. We're going to get into that next in Quick Hits. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the thousands of people protesting vaccine mandates in Ottawa hold unacceptable views, and a high school in New York allegedly locked students in a library for not wearing masks. We'll show you what one mother had to say about all that. It is time for Quick Hits. So some people, not just in America, but around the world, are recognizing that this COVID tyranny is completely insane, doesn't even save us, doesn't keep us protected. People pushing this are idiots who can't think for themselves. And that government bureaucrats, whether health policy people or politicians, who refuse to admit that they've been so wrong on so many things and what they're doing is so stupid, are an enormous threat to liberty and to the future of the societies in which they've unfortunately been able to, infect the minds of lots of folks. There's few who are worse than Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Right now, underway in Canada, there are thousands of truckers who are protesting the vaccine mandate in Ottawa. Justin Trudeau just says their views are unacceptable.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
Next question.
Yeah, give up your freedom, do what we say so you can have freedom. That's what that abject, imbecile, beta male fool is telling people in Canada right now. The truckers are right, he is wrong, he's an appalling idiot, but he's a man of the left, so it's not surprising to see who he's become now, huh? Not at all. A high school in New York reportedly locked students in a library for not wearing masks. And this is after a court has ruled in New York that the mask mandate is in fact not constitutional within the state of New York. Watch this.
Nobody locks my kid in a goddamn library. This is not a detention camp. This is an educational facility. Look me in the eye then. Don't just sit here and look at your phone.
Chris,
I need to get my daughter. I don't know. What library was my kid in? Because nobody locks my kid in a library. In the main office.
Where's the main office? Right here.
Go left.
You can find out the library.
fired up. People get upset when their children are being abused in the name of pseudoscience. What is he even doing? Cloth masks don't work. We all know this. They even say it now. They admit it. The mask maniac. Let's do N95 masks now. Just like last year, the cloth masks didn't work. You know what they said? Double mask. Remember that? I do. By the way, a dad in Loudoun County, Virginia, scorched the school board there and revealed that his 6-year-old daughter is still suffering from speech delays as the result of forced masking for 2 years. Watch this.
My beautiful 6-year-old kindergarten daughter asked to come with me today to see the people who are forcing her against her will and mine to wear a mask. Mr. Ziegler, right there, I have a question for you. Do you know her name? Mr. Marshall, were you there when she was born? Mr. Hoyler, were you there when she got on the school bus for her first day of kindergarten? Mr. Morse, do you know that she has trouble pronouncing her SP syllables? Mr. Sorokin, did you know wearing a mask is contributing to my daughter's LCPS's speech services? Of course you don't know any of this, yet you feel that you have the right to mandate a medical decision for my child. And you feel so strongly about this that you are willing to break an executive order to do it.
Unbelievable what they're putting children through, what they're doing to them. It's appalling. It's really child abuse what's going on all across the country right now because of the Fauciites. Switching gears here for a second, a woman is explaining that professional attire is bad because I'll let her explain.
So I need y'all to deconstruct the way a professional needs to look because that's white capitalism. That's the way they made people look like for these corporations, okay? So yes, I have piercings. Yes, I have tattoos. Yes, I speak the way I speak. I have no energy for your traditions and taboos, if I'm very honest, because I'm breaking those. I'm breaking the generational curses and these freaking beliefs that honestly have kept us the way we have been for generations. So, get out of here.
Whatever. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.